while New York City, for example, now has record homelessness with 16,000 kids in homeless shelters, it's so bad the city is giving free one-way airline tickets, trying to get the homeless to fly out of the city.
Detroit is completely collapsing.
Detroit. But look, here is the telltale sign. New York's Fifth Avenue, one of the most famous shopping meccas in the world, has now got a 15.3% vacancy rate. On Fifth Avenue, in prime commercial real estate. John Williams reported today that when you look at retail sales adjusted for inflation, currently they are at the level of 10 years ago. He says that 10 years' worth of retail sales growth has been destroyed. And and I agree with him that this crisis is just starting. It's not really even well underway.
And that's the question for you, sir. So the slide you're saying, and everybody else is now saying, you were talking about dollar in trouble 3 years ago. They weren't. Now it's mainstream news. Is it a slow slide into third world oblivion, or is it going to come quicker? And what are the people going to do as New York State has passed 84 new taxes, I was reading last week, in the last year? The government just keeps growing. The government keeps adding people. Everybody I know is having really, seeing cuts in pay or losing their jobs. And the media is saying the economy's recovered. I mean, where is this going?
Well, we don't have, as well as I do, we don't have a media. The media serves as the ministry of truth or the ministry of propaganda, and whatever it says is unreliable. Other than the trouble of the dollar, which is in oversupply, we have another amazing fact, and that is for all of this decade, they kept the economy going by growing consumer debt. We've talked about this before. Well, now the consumers are all drowning in debt, and they can't take on any more. So there's no way to expand consumer spending. In the old days, consumer spending grew with the productivity of the workforce when we still had industry and jobs here. So people would be more productive, their real incomes would go up, they could spend more. That was the source of economic growth. For all the 21st century, the source of growth was driving the consumers deeper into debt. So they would borrow the money to keep the spending going. They would max out the credit cards. They took out home equity loans and spent the equity, and now that's stopped. So there's no way to get the consumer economy going except for the bankers who are going to get these huge bonuses, of course, the armaments industries. But except for the super rich, the Americans don't have any income growth.
That's right.
Now they're faced, like you said, with more taxes. Because the states are broke, the counties are broke, the cities are broke, and the federal government is broke. So they're going to be forced into lower standards of living. And it's going to be really hard on the very poor, but it's going to be hard on everybody. And I don't know whether it'll radicalize the people or whether the government will succeed in blaming Al-Qaeda or terrorists or Iranians or Russians or whoever. I don't know what capacity the people have to realize what's being done to them.
Well, that was my next question. Is the media now saying Iran is killing the dollar? I'm sure you've seen that. I mean, you just mentioned it. And they're saying the Russians and Chinese are doing it. But I read what the Russians and Chinese and the Arabs are saying, and the Persians are saying. They're going, look, all these countries, we keep buying your dollars. We're losing 10% on this in the last year. Your central banks have engaged in the policies that are doing this. Please stop. And then meanwhile, the Federal Reserve comes out and blames them when they're the very group doing it.
Right. See, I don't think anybody's trying to kill the dollar on purpose. I think the dollar is being killed because of the hubris and stupidity of the American policymakers. And the rest of the world sits there and watches this and says, well, look, they're going to kill it. They won't listen. There's nothing we can do. So let's be prepared and have something to use when they succeed through hubris and stupidity in killing the currency. And so,
exactly. That's what they're saying. They're saying when America goes down, it's going to be like a hydrogen bomb devastating all the other economies. It's just we're going to be in the middle of the smoldering crater in the worst position. Doctor, what will this look like being a top economist, one of the top economists out there in the world, recognized? I mean, we've seen this in other countries and other permutations. What's the best guess timeline on where this is going? Because, 2 years ago, you hoped they would pull out. They're clearly, it looks like you're saying, aren't going to. So what's the trajectory and what do you expect this to look like in 2 years?
Well, I think it's going to be the hardest on the Americans because, as you said, we won't be able to pay for the imports, and we're very import dependent, not just on energy, but on manufactured goods and advanced technology products. And if you can't pay for your energy imports, then that disrupts food deliveries and people's ability to get to the jobs. We have this sort of urban, suburban culture where people drive for an hour one way to jobs and back. And so it's all kinds of problems are brewing there. I think it won't be all that terrible for other countries. China, of course, may lose a lot of its the value of a lot of its foreign exchange reserves, which are in dollars, but I don't know that will particularly hurt them because they've got the technology, they've got the industry, the paper isn't that important to them. And so you may know that Robert Fisk reported from Lebanon last week that China, Russia, including Japan and France, and the Gulf Arab oil interests are already devising a substitute for the dollar when it goes. Now, when it goes, no one really knows. Fisk gives a timeline of 9 years. I myself don't see how the dollar can possibly survive as world reserve currency for 9 more years. And so I think what is going to happen when the dollar loses its status, it's going to put a brake on the ability of the United States to conduct wars. And so we may actually get some peace as a payoff from the collapse of the dollar because American power will collapse with it. And I think that's what the rest of the world sees, and I think that's why they're not particularly disturbed by the decline in the dollar because what they are disturbed by is the American way of being a bully, of being hegemonic, of ordering people around, of purchasing the leaders of foreign countries so that the leaders represent us rather than their own people. People are tired of that. All the threats that we are always issuing to everybody, not just to Iran, but to everybody.
Well, look at how they're trying to use the military. Look at the G20. Look at how they're openly deploying. Now the Pentagon wants 379,000 troops domestically. And in closing here, Doctor, I want to say bye to you in the break because I have a question for you off air. The establishment certainly is full of hubris, the private banking establishment running all these Ponzi schemes. But at the same time, they're gearing up the prisons. They're telling local police, get ready for riots. They've been doing this the last couple of years. They're clearly getting the infrastructure ready for the implosion in the United States. So I think that shows there's a method to the madness and that they've got some tricks up their sleeves, as the Rand Corporation document said last year, start a big new world war. Somehow they've got a trick. The Anglo-American establishment, allied with Israel, has tricks up their sleeves, and it looks like that's going to be war or giant false flags. Your take on that? Well,
the only way they can have war is the foreigners will have to finance it. We can't finance it with no money. I mean, the current budget is 50% in the red. So I think, I do agree with you that They've got SWAT teams everywhere domestically. I see them even in these small mountain towns in North Georgia. They've got SWAT teams, which they don't need for any real reason. And so I do think they expect that things are going to get rough for them. And, Gerald Celente and others are predicting that there are going to be riots and there's going to be a revolution. And I think if the unemployment continues to rise, which I think it will do next year, there's going to be a lot of unrest and gangs and looting because people are going to be so hard-pressed. In the old days, the Depression, when people lost their jobs, prices were falling. It's different if you lose your job and prices are rising.